Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a situation that almost everyone has faced at some point in their career. The voluntary overtime trap. We've all been there. It's Friday afternoon, you're ready to start your weekend, and suddenly your boss starts talking about team spirit and going the extra mile. But is it really a choice if your job is on the line? In this video, we are going to walk through a 10-chapter story following a group of colleagues as they navigate this exact dilemma. This is a great way to practice intermediate to advanced English, especially when it comes to workplace idioms, phrases used in professional settings, nuance, understanding the difference between what people say and what they actually mean, and real-life problem solving, how to set boundaries without losing your professional edge. Let's get started with Chapter 1, The Friday Forecast. The atmosphere in the open plan office was uncharacteristically light for a rainy Friday afternoon. It was 4:15 p.m. and the rhythmic clicking of keyboards had slowed into a more relaxed, syncopated beat. Behind their monitors, the team was quietly transitioning into weekend mode. Liam glanced at the bottom corner of his screen, counting down the minutes. He had already mentally checked out, thinking about the hiking trip he had planned for the next morning. Beside him, Maya was already clearing her desk, her movements efficient and purposeful. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to suggest that the week's work was finally drawing to a close. Then, the heavy glass door of the corner office swung open. Marcus, the department head, stepped out with a rolled-up sleeves energy that didn't match the hour. He didn't head for the elevator. Instead, he walked toward the center of the room and clapped his hands twice. The sound acted like a physical brake on the office's momentum. "Team, can I have everyone's eyes up here for a second?" Marcus asked. It wasn't a question. As the group gathered around his standing desk, Marcus leaned against the mahogany surface, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Look, I know it's Friday, and believe me, I'd rather be home too, but we've hit a bit of a snag with the Sterling account. It's going to take a real group effort to get this polished before Monday morning." Liam felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The forecast for the weekend had just changed. Marcus took a slow breath and looked around the circle, making direct eye contact with each person. The silence in the room grew heavy as the team waited for the other shoe to drop. "I'm not going to order anyone to stay," Marcus said, holding up his hands in a defensive gesture. "I'm just asking for a few team players to step up and help us cross the finish line tonight." He emphasized the words team players with a sharp nod, as if he were handing out a badge of honor. Maya shifted her weight, her hand tightening around the strap of her laptop bag. "Marcus, I have a commitment at 6, she said softly, her voice wavering just a fraction. Marcus didn't stop smiling, but his posture stiffened. "Of course, Maya, family and personal life are vital," he replied smoothly, "but we're at a crossroads here with the Sterling account. This is the kind of moment that defines who is really committed to our collective success." He let that sentence hang in the air like a thick fog. It wasn't an order, but the implication was loud and clear to everyone standing there. Leaving early wouldn't just be going home, it would be viewed as an act of betrayal. Liam looked at his keyboard, feeling the weight of Marcus's gaze moving toward him next. "I'm sure we can knock this out in just a few hours if we all pull together," Marcus added. He sat down at the head of the conference table and opened his laptop, signaling that the meeting was over. The voluntary invitation had been issued, and the exit door suddenly felt a mile away. Liam realized that his hiking trip wasn't the only thing at risk. His reputation was on the line, too. The sound of Marcus's laptop lid clicking open felt like a gavel hitting a desk. Most of the team began to slowly drift back toward their seats, defeated by the unspoken pressure. However, Sarah remained standing in the center of the aisle, her car keys already in her hand. "Marcus, I'm sorry, but I really can't stay tonight," she said, her voice sounding louder than usual in the quiet office. "My daughter has her first violin recital at 7, and I promised her I'd be in the front row." Marcus didn't look up from his screen immediately. He continued typing for a few agonizing seconds. When he finally raised his head, his expression was one of disappointed understanding. "The violin, right. That's wonderful, Sarah, truly," he said, though his tone remained flat. "Go ahead, we wouldn't want you to miss that." He turned his gaze to the rest of the group, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I suppose the rest of us will just have to pick up the extra slack to cover your portion of the Sterling file." The air in the room turned icy as the team player trap was officially sprung. Sarah flushed a deep red, looking at her colleagues as if searching for an ally or a sign of support. But Liam and the others kept their eyes glued to their monitors, afraid that looking up would make them the next target. Sarah hesitated for a moment, her thumb tracing the edge of her key fob. "I'll be in early on Monday to catch up," she whispered, but Marcus had already turned back to his work. She walked toward the elevator, her heels clicking rapidly against the hardwood floor. Every person left behind felt a mix of secret admiration for her courage and a growing resentment for the work she left behind. As the elevator doors chimed and closed, Marcus muttered, "It's interesting to see where people's priorities lie when things get tough." The rest of the team stayed silent, their fingers returning to their keyboards with a heavy, rhythmic gloom. By 6:30 p.m., the initial surge of nervous energy had completely evaporated. The office was dim, lit only by the harsh blue glow of computer screens and a few overhead lights. Liam stood up to stretch his aching back and wandered toward the break room, desperate for a change of scenery. He found Maya and Javier hovering near the coffee machine, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "This is the 3rd time this month," Javier whispered, his eyes darting toward the hallway. "I was supposed to meet my brother for dinner. He's only in town for one night." Maya nodded, leaning against the counter as the coffee machine ground and hissed. "It's the way he framed it that gets me," she said, her voice filled with quiet frustration. "He calls it voluntary, but we all know that leaving early is a one-way ticket to a bad performance review." Liam joined them, keeping his voice low as he reached for a stale granola bar. "He's playing us against each other," Liam added, glancing back at the darkened office floor. "By making Sarah look like the bad guy for leaving, he's forced us to stay just to prove we aren't like her." The three of them stood in silence for a moment, the shared resentment bonding them together. For a few minutes, the break room felt like a sanctuary, a place where they could drop the team player mask. "Are we really going to just let this happen every single time?" Javier asked, looking from Maya to Liam. "What choice do we have?" Maya replied, staring at the black liquid filling her cup. "He holds the keys to our promotions, our bonuses, and our references." The sound of Marcus's distinctive booming laugh echoed from the main office area. The small spark of resistance in the break room faded as quickly as it had ignited. They finished their coffee in silence and walked back to their desks, one by one, like prisoners returning to their cells. The clock on the wall ticked past 7:15 p.m., and the office had entered a surreal state of quiet. Marcus began to pace the floor, stopping occasionally at people's desks to check in on their progress. He didn't ask about the data or the spreadsheets. Instead, he spoke in a dialect of corporate encouragement. "I really appreciate the synergy I'm seeing tonight,"
he said, leaning over Liam's shoulder. "This is what extreme ownership looks like, Liam." Liam forced a nod, even though his eyes were beginning to blur from the constant glare of the monitor. He realized that Marcus was using these buzzwords as a psychological tether to keep them in their seats. Whenever someone looked like they were about to pack up, Marcus would drop a comment about dedication or long-term vision. It was a clever strategy. He was redefining staying late without pay as investing in one's future. Maya, who was usually the most outspoken, remained silent as Marcus praised her commitment to excellence. She knew that if she challenged his vocabulary, she would be labeled as someone with a negative attitude. The language Marcus used created a binary world where you were either a warrior for the company or a burden to it. There was no room in his vocabulary for concepts like work-life balance or labor rights. As Liam typed, he felt the weight of the guilt Marcus was so carefully constructing. The boss wasn't just asking for their time, he was asking for their absolute loyalty to the mission. Every time Marcus used the word family, Liam felt a fresh wave of irritation. Real families didn't demand that you sacrifice your health and personal happiness for a quarterly report. Yet, the power of the words was undeniable, making everyone feel like their personal time was a selfish luxury. The language of guilt was working perfectly, turning their exhaustion into a badge of forced pride.
The clock struck 8:30 p.m., but the actual output of the room had slowed to a crawl. While everyone's fingers were moving, the quality of the work was rapidly deteriorating. Liam found himself staring at the same paragraph for 10 minutes, his brain unable to process the data. Across the aisle, Javier was clicking through folders repeatedly just to look like he was doing something. It had become a theater of busyness, where the goal wasn't to finish, but simply to be seen working. Marcus remained in his glass office, his silhouette visible as he paced back and forth on a phone call. The team stayed in their seats because his light was still on, locked in a silent game of who will leave first. The air in the office felt stale and recycled, adding to the growing sense of physical lethargy. Errors began to creep into the Sterling file, typos, broken formulas, and missed details. Because everyone was exhausted, they were making mistakes that would take twice as long to fix on Monday. "Is anyone actually making progress?" Maya whispered, leaning over the partition toward Liam. "I'm just moving commas around at this point," Liam admitted, rubbing his tired eyes. They were sacrificing their Friday night for the appearance of hard work, not the reality of it. The irony was that the team effort Marcus demanded was actually making the project worse. Productivity had been replaced by presence, and presence was being measured by suffering. Liam noticed that Javier had a sports news website open in a small window hidden behind a spreadsheet. Nobody blamed him. They were all just waiting for the clock to run out on Marcus's ego. The theater continued, a room full of people pretending to be warriors, while they were actually just burnt out. True dedication had vanished hours ago, leaving only the hollow shell of corporate compliance. By 9:15 p.m., the thin veneer of professional politeness finally began to crack. The silence was suddenly shattered by the sharp sound of a keyboard being shoved across a desk. Javier had accidentally deleted a complex formula in the shared Sterling spreadsheet, losing an hour of work. "Are you kidding me right now?" Maya snapped, her voice much louder than intended in the quiet room. She had been waiting for that specific data to finish her own section, and her patience had reached its limit. Javier spun around in his chair, his face flushed with a mixture of fatigue and embarrassment. "It was an accident, Maya. Maybe if I wasn't cross-eyed from staring at the screen for 12 hours, it wouldn't have happened." The two of them stared at each other,
the tension of the last 5 hours boiling over into a heated glare. Usually they were the best of friends in the office, often sharing jokes and grabbing lunch together. But the forced overtime had turned them into adversaries, competing for the prize of simply being allowed to go home. Marcus's office door creaked open, and he stepped out, looking more annoyed by the noise than concerned about the stress. "Is there a problem with the flow out here?" he asked, crossing his arms over his chest. Maya turned toward him, her hands trembling slightly as she pointed at her monitor. "The problem, Marcus, is that we are exhausted and making mistakes that are going to cost us more time later." Marcus didn't apologize. He simply sighed and shook his head like a disappointed parent. "I expected more resilience from this group," he said coldly, his eyes lingering on Maya. The argument died down instantly, replaced by a thick, suffocating layer of resentment. Javier turned back to his screen in silence, and Maya slumped into her chair, her eyes welling with frustrated tears. The breaking point hadn't led to a revolution, it had only deepened the cracks in the team's spirit. The heavy scent of grease and cardboard preceded Marcus as he walked back into the room at 9:45 p.m. He was carrying 3 large pizza boxes, balancing them precariously with a wide, forced grin. "Who's hungry?" he called out, his voice echoing too loudly against the quiet walls. "I thought the Sterling Warriors deserved a little fuel to keep the engines running." He cleared a space on the communal table and flipped the lids open, revealing lukewarm pepperoni and cheese. For Marcus, this was a generous gesture, a sign of his appreciation for their hard work. But to Liam, looking at the congealed cheese, it felt like a hollow bribe to buy another 2 hours of their lives. It was the classic corporate trade-off, your Friday night and your mental health in exchange for a $10 meal. The team stood up slowly, moving toward the table like zombies drawn to a flickering light. They ate in a strained, uncomfortable silence, the only sound being the rustle of paper napkins. "See?" Marcus said, taking a large bite of a slice. "Nothing brings a team together like a late-night pizza party." Javier looked at his slice and then at his watch. It was nearly 10 p.m., and he had missed his brother's dinner entirely. The appreciation felt more like an insult, a cheap substitute for the overtime pay they weren't receiving. Maya didn't even take a piece. She just stood by the window, looking out at the empty, dark street below. The pizza wasn't fuel. It was a reminder of how little Marcus actually valued their time outside of these walls. Every bite felt like a confirmation that their boundaries had been successfully breached. Marcus finished his slice quickly, wiped his hands, and clapped them together once more. "All right, now that we've had our second wind, let's push through that final data set." He headed back to his office, leaving the half-empty boxes behind, like the remains of a defeated army.
The clock on the wall finally ticked over to 11:15 p.m., and the office was as cold as a tomb. Marcus emerged from his office, stretching his arms and looking satisfied with the progress he had supervised. "Okay, team, I think we've reached a solid stopping point for tonight," he announced, as if granting a royal pardon. "Excellent work. This is exactly what I mean when I talk about going above and beyond for the brand." There were no cheers or sighs of relief. The team simply began to shut down their computers in a rhythmic, mechanical silence. Liam felt a strange numbness as he packed his bag, his movements slow and heavy with exhaustion. He didn't look at Marcus, and he didn't look at his colleagues. He just wanted to escape the fluorescent lights. The group walked together toward the elevator, a small, tired crowd that looked more like a funeral procession than a winning team.
As the elevator descended, the reflection in the metal doors showed 4 people with dark circles under their eyes and slumped shoulders. The doors chimed open at the ground floor, and the cool night air hit them like a shock to the system. They walked out into the empty parking lot, where the silence was only broken by the distant sound of a lone car on the highway. "See you Monday," Javier muttered, his voice barely a whisper, as he turned toward his vehicle without looking back. Maya didn't even say goodbye. She just walked quickly to her car, her keys jingling in the darkness. Liam stood by his car for a moment, looking up at the single lit window on the top floor, where Marcus was likely still lingering. He felt a deep sense of loss, not just for the hours he'd spent, but for the respect he once had for his workplace. The walk of shame wasn't because they had done anything wrong, but because they had allowed their boundaries to be trampled. He started his engine, the headlights cutting through the gloom, and drove away from the building that had stolen his Friday. The hiking trip tomorrow felt impossible now. His body was present, but his spirit was completely drained. As he pulled out of the lot, he realized the team had never felt more disconnected than they did at that moment. Monday morning arrived with a heavy, overcast sky that matched the mood in the office. Liam sat at his desk, staring at a half-empty cup of coffee and the daunting list of tasks for the week ahead. The weekend had passed in a blur of exhaustion. His hiking trip canceled because he was too drained to leave the house. At exactly 9 a.m., the familiar ping of a new email echoed across the room. Every head in the office turned toward their screens at the exact same moment. The subject line read, "Our sterling success, a true team effort." Liam clicked it open and felt his jaw tighten as he read the opening paragraph. "I want to personally thank the Sterling Warriors who stayed late on Friday to ensure our success," Marcus had written. "Your grit and unwavering loyalty are what make this company a leader in the industry." The email went on to describe the night as a bonding experience that had strengthened the department's foundation. Liam looked over at Maya, who was staring at the screen with a look of pure, cold detachment. The email hadn't just praised those who stayed, it had intentionally ignored Sarah, the defector from Chapter 3. By highlighting the warriors, Marcus had officially created a 2-tier system in the office, the loyalists and the others. The memo was a warning disguised as a thank you note, a reminder that the next voluntary request was coming soon. Javier deleted the email without finishing it, his face set in a grim expression of silent resignation. The office was quiet, but it wasn't the productive silence of a focused team. It was the quiet of a group that had lost its trust. Liam realized that the Sterling account might be polished, but the team's spirit was now permanently tarnished. He closed the email and looked at his calendar, wondering how much longer he could survive in a place where family was a weapon. The cycle was set to repeat, and the team players knew that the next voluntary afternoon was only 4 days away. That brings us to the end of our story. It's a tough situation, but seeing it through these characters helps us understand the specific language used in these high-pressure moments. Now, as I mentioned at the start of the video, it's time to review what we've learned. Make sure to check the description box below to see the full list of vocabulary and idioms from today's story. Take a moment to see if you can correctly identify the idioms and corporate jargon we covered, like team player and picking up the slack. How would you have handled Marcus if you were in Liam's shoes? Would you have stayed, or would you have walked out with Sarah? Let me know in the comments. If you found this story helpful for your English journey, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life lessons. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. Goodbye.